permit because my professor was on a special committee to review all the films and all the plays that went to New York, because George Washington is a stumping ground for the plays that go to New York. And I was chosen to do that, and I got a special permit to go to all the plays out at George Washington for a whole semester and write up a report on them. And he says, "You're talented, we want you to do this, you just need some experience." So after I made the first 5, he said, "Oh my God, you're ready now." But he taught me how to write, and I've been writing ever since. But he says you need something to be the vehicle. The plays, Shakespeare and all the others, would be good vehicles for you to look at. Here's our special pass. You will sit up in the stadium with all the other great playwright interviewers. They were critics for Hollywood and New York, Broadway. They were critics for Broadway. He says, "Don't worry about it." Now, some of my colleagues are nasty. They want you sitting up in the big place like my seat, his seat. And he says, "Don't worry about them. They don't understand. You're taking my place." I did that for a whole semester.
Wow.
I'm ready when you guys are.
Anytime. I'm ready. I'm anytime.
Okay, so just introduce yourself, Lena. I'm Lena, how can we say this? I'm talking to, well, just go, if there's no right or wrong here, so it's just.
Oh, here, I wrote it down.
Okay, you wrote it down?
Well, I underlined it.
Okay, all right, well, go for it, girl.
Name of interviewee, date, time, and location.
Okay, oh, they do have it on there. See, I forgot about that. Okay, so you wanna start off? Just go ahead and start it then. 3,
Okay.
2, 1.
Hello, my name is Lena Hilliard.
Okay, stop. As a historian, as a young historian, you are excited about the information you're about to receive. You just found some great information that nobody else in New York have heard. So I want you to be a little bit more excited. Okay,
More excited, less.
Yeah, I know we said this is going to be kind of like the laid back, the stuff like this, but this will go.
Is he going to say his own name, or should I say his name?
You can say his name. You can introduce him. It'd be good if you introduce him, yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna have those sub things underneath it anyway,
Okay.
so. And make sure we got all of his information, everything, the PhD, the DDF, and RFTZ, and all of them things.
I'm interviewing Dr. Carrol Wayman, PhD.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't know.
And a few other things too.
I don't know what his titles are. Maybe
That's just PhD is good enough.
PhD, yeah.
All the others you can.
Okay.
Okay, so Dr. Wayman, that means you'll talk a little bit about you, you guys got the
Yeah,
questions, okay, so I'm trusting that in you. Okay, so stand by, and 3, 2, 1.
Hello, my name is Lena Hilliard, and I'm here interviewing Dr. Carrol Wayman, PhD. And today is May, what is it?
21.
I don't know the day. Today is May 21st, 2014, and this is the San Diego Urban League in San Diego, California.
Okay, I want you to stop 1 second, hold that. We'll let this pass by. We might have that a couple of times. So. Okay, continue.
Okay. Would you like for me to start with the interview?
Yes, go.
Okay. I would like to start off with where you were born and where you grew up.
Okay, I was born in North Carolina, well, born in South Carolina, but I don't know anything about that. But I was reared in North Carolina through the first teenage years, and then I left there and went into the military. And after leaving the military, we moved to Philadelphia. So Philadelphia is like home for me because that's where I remember everything from when I came out of the service. And so Philadelphia is home, finished high school there again, and went to Temple University in Philadelphia, the famous Temple University that Bill Cosby went to, and went from there to Howard University and to a lot of other universities. So that's essentially the educational route I took.
Okay, nice. How did you end up in Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles? Yeah, Los Angeles, I was teaching school, my wife and I were teaching school in Philadelphia. And in the summer of 1959, the snow was so deep it covered our little new Volkswagen. Literally, it covered it, and the school was closed for a week. And I said, "Sweetheart, this is enough of this mess in the snow. Call your sister who lived in Los Angeles and tell her as soon as school is over in June, we will be there." She did, and we moved to Los Angeles just like that. We had 2 cars, so we drove 1 car. I went back, picked up my little Volkswagen, and drove it by myself back from Philadelphia to Los Angeles.
Wow.
I stayed in Los Angeles for 4 years before coming here, San Diego.
Okay. And how did you get involved with the human rights program?
Human Relations in San Diego. Well, because I had worked for the Human Relations Agency in Los Angeles, and the cities were blowing up and having all kinds of riots and difficulties. And San Diego was one of those cities where they needed a human relations agency. And so Los Angeles agency had become known, because it was one of the first ever established, known to supply directors to setting up human relations agencies across the country. So San Diego then decided at first that we didn't have any problems here. It was perfect and all this. And then later on they decided maybe, just maybe, we need a human relations agency, and maybe we have problems. So after the maybes were over with the city council, they decided, let's do it. But to do that, they had really organized what we call a volunteer group called CIC, Citizens Interracial Committee. That was a volunteer group, none paid, for the first year. But after the riots broke out and there were 3 college kids, youth that were killed in the South, they decided that maybe we have problems in San Diego. So they called Los Angeles, where I was working, and say, "Do you have somebody who can come down here and set up a human relations agency for us?" And my boss was John Buggs, beautiful man, my mentor. He says yes. So he sent 2 of us down to be interviewed. 2 of us came down twice. They chose me, and I moved here on September 6, 1964, and been here ever since, 50 years.
Wow. Can you tell me how you've seen the ideas of opportunity, bias, segregation, and equality develop over your lifetime, specifically in San Diego?
Oh yes, San Diego, I named it the Mississippi of the West because it, in fact, was one of the most segregated cities I have ever been in. Of course, it got me into trouble a lot of times, but eventually it worked out well. We became one of the most popular groups in town ever, still popular, called the Citizens Interracial Committee, CIC for short. We were the official human relations agency for the city. We eventually had 19 staff people. We worked in every area you can think of, from housing to police relations to education and the whole bit. We filed several lawsuits. One big one was to desegregate the city's schools, because we were just as segregated, more segregated than many cities in the country. And so we filed a lawsuit here to desegregate the schools. Took 20 years to get it through and completed, but we did it. We filed lawsuits against all kinds of groups in town, and we opened up the city because we couldn't live everywhere. Where we're living right now, we couldn't live here because we were black or brown. Mm-hmm. And so my staff was made up of 19 different ethnic and racial groups, sexes and everything else, and so we did it. And that was my job for 5 years, and we had ourselves a ball. Got into all kinds of trouble, of course, but we did it.
Wow. Wow. Are there any specific moments or stories that you'd like to share about your times working in that organization?
Let me see. Yeah, I guess there are two big activities. We formed what is known as the City Community Dialogue. Incredible what I'm about to tell you. For 27 months, we met in the city council chambers every other Friday, with all the media from San Diego and sometimes from Los Angeles and other places. We met from 9 to 12 every other Friday in City Hall for 27 months. The city was there, the mayor was there, anybody in town that was anybody visited us. My job was to share it, and we brought in black and youth, black and Hispanic in particular, and other peoples of color. And we stood around the walls, and we had literally hundreds of people there every Friday. It was crowded in City Hall, never been done before. And there we argued back and forth. My job was to moderate it, but it was a confrontation, and we figured it out. The agency I worked for, that's the only way to get people talking. And if people talk long enough, they begin to respect each other. It just took 27 months before finally we decided we did a good job, believe it or not. The people who ran this city got a chance to meet young black and brown youth, brown berets with their guns, and the youth, all the, what we call the us group with their guns and everything, in City Hall. Never been done before. My job was to moderate it. We have photos of all of this, of course, to moderate it so that nobody got hurt. I enjoyed that. That was a high moment. The other high moment was, so we called that the City Community Dialogue. The other was, we organized groups that went around from city to city and church to church, schools, garages, and whatever you want to call it. And we had city community dialogues in homes, in churches, in garages, where black youth and so forth are chosen, and brown together, black and brown, always at least two, black and brown youth would meet with different groups in the city, white groups primarily, who had never met black people or brown people or talked to youth. And of course these were called militants, and of course militant was a bad word, but these was black youth and brown youth who were willing to sit down and argue and talk. Our job was to say talk. Get mad, but talk some more. Get angry, but talk some more. And so we had series of 7, called a series of 7, and that's what we did. We did that for about 14 months around the city and the county, everywhere, from every city in the county and so forth. And it was a 7-point series, 7 nights of series, and we went around and tried to tell people what racism was about. That was a good activity. Wow. But we worked with the schools, you name it. We worked with the schools. We have to choose principals, vice principals, teachers. We worked with the school district. We filed a lawsuit against the city schools, as well as lawsuits against other groups in the county to say, we don't want this crazy mess here. We don't want racial segregation. It's got to go. It has to be opened up to everybody, regardless of race and creed. And that's what we did.
Before you go to the next question, now say one more time the name of the organization.
Good. The organization was the Citizens Interracial Committee. That was the official name of the official human relations agency in San Diego. It was popularly known as CIC, Citizens Interracial Committee, made up of everybody that looked like a human being in this town. And youth, we had a great youth department,
Okay. And now going back to, I know you called San Diego the Mississippi of the West. Why do you think San Diego was so much more segregated and there was so much more racial discrimination than other Western cities?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I thought about it for many. Of course, we did the agency for many years. We had to think about it because we were not known. San Diego was simply not known anywhere. That little town down there from Los Angeles, who knows that little town? It's near the border down there. And then they call them all kinds of names, those Hispanics, those dirty Mexicans and all that sort of stuff. And I said, wait a minute. Yeah, that's the town we need to be in. And so my staff was made up of everybody, you name it. About 40% were Hispanic altogether. We had everybody that's anybody in this town as part of our staff. And the reason that your question, though, is it was unknown. Very few people had ever heard of San Diego, that little Mexican town near the borders down there, because military town, it was called military town. All they have are those Mexican prostitutes that come across the border. So what is all this crazy mess about making San Diego an all-American city? Well, that's what we need to do. That's why we need to change it. Well, there are nothing but prostitutes coming across, some military and all this. I said, yes, it's military, but that prostitute stuff got to go. And so that's what we did. We changed all that stuff.
That's wonderful.
We changed the city schools. It was segregated, the most segregated. That's why I call it the Mississippi of the West. People had never heard of that little town called San Diego. Segregation, the most racist, racist 2 people I ever met in my life was the superintendent of schools, We had to fight him all the way when we filed a lawsuit to desegregate our schools. And the other was a police chief in this town. He was bad. He was bad in the negative sense. And so we had to file lawsuits against both of them to change the situation here. It was awful. They used to beat up kids, not too far from here, cemetery. They beat up black kids. The police would take black kids out and beat them up, literally. So they would talk to them. We had to change all of that. Not everything was negative against the police or the city council. And I'm not implying that. But to answer your question, it was a bad place for black and brown people to live.
Mm-hmm.
It was great for white people to live. They ran everything. We changed that.
That's wonderful. How do you see the advancement of job opportunity, racial equality, housing ability, and access to education manifest itself differently today than it did back then?
Oh yeah, that's great. We can live everywhere. We can live here. I can walk over where we're talking from right now. I can walk here. I can come in these buildings. We couldn't do that when I came. And this is not far from downtown.
Yeah.
We lived in only 13 census tracts out of the many, many census tracts when we came to San Diego. And but people don't know about San Diego, but it was just a couple of miles from downtown. Now we live everywhere. We changed all of that. It was called restrictive covenants. This is, in 1948, the Supreme Court ruled that restrictive covenants were no longer enforceable. That's another way of saying they were illegal. By restrictive covenants, we mean black people and peoples of color were restricted to certain areas. And communities wrote out, you don't sell this house to black people, you don't sell this house to Hispanic people, you don't sell this house to yellow or brown people. And they were enforceable. And so we said, that's got to go, that's got to change. And we didn't live in Fallbrook and Escondido and Poway and all those places. We changed all of that. What's called restrictive covenants. So we changed the restrictive covenants legally and so forth, and we worked throughout the whole county. That's how we changed the whole thing so we could live everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that was education. The city schools were, oh my God, they were the worst of all. But we had to fight the school district and file a lawsuit against the school district just to get black and brown, not just black, but black and brown, for example, to go to schools wherever we wanted to, live in the communities wherever we wanted to. There were no bus drivers here. They'd only had one, if I can repeat that a million times, one yellow cab taxi driver in the whole history of San Diego. We said, it's got to change. So we changed that. But one black taxi driver. But we couldn't eat in hotels downtown. And only a few small hotels, little restaurants would feed us. So we had to change all of that, all the hotels. We changed all the hotels and restaurants. And the banks. The banks didn't have black, they only had one woman who had ever been a teller in the Bank of America here. She still lives, I understand. So we had to change all of that. We couldn't live in the hotels, couldn't eat in the restaurants. So we set about changing all of that. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did for 5 years. When we closed down, we could live everywhere, eat everywhere, drive buses. We could do the whole thing. So that's why, to answer your question, that's why we had to fight all this stuff in San Diego, because it's not known. But luckily for the city council, after they debated it and all that, luckily they brought us here from Los Angeles, and they agreed that we need to change it. Now, it was not easy.
Yeah, I believe it. What were some of the biggest challenges that you
City schools, police department, employment for the city of San Diego, and housing, I guess. Well, it was, blacks lived in 15 census tracts, as I mentioned, along with Hispanics, and some of the Asian groups, none color, none whites. Mm-hmm. I don't know when I think about it often, but I guess the challenge was to create programs as opposed to fighting individuals. And this was a tough one because that isn't the way you work against racism. It's usually individuals. And we said, no, we're not fighting individuals. We're fighting a method or a belief system that to be colored, meaning black and brown or yellow or beige, to be colored or Hispanic is a sin. And so we will not fight individuals. We fight the racism involved in it. We fight a system of beliefs. So we organize everything around a belief system that color was bad and white was perfect and good. So we had to fight it that way. We didn't fight individuals. We fought the ism of race.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer, though? What?
Are there any challenges or problems with San Diego that we still need to work on today?
Yes, there are many. There are many. We will reach. Let's see. This is strange. Back then, we fought legal discrimination because they had laws that said so. We went through the whole process of like the big national and international desegregation of schools in 1954, the famous 1954 decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It was legal then. They could enforce it. We changed all of that in San Diego, as we did in other cities. But the strange part about it is we are now resegregated. The schools are more resegregated, more racially segregated now than they were then. So we have black and brown communities. Allegedly, it's because we voluntarily now live where we want to. To us, some of us, we think that's shameful, the way it is, because blacks live in black communities. We are a city of communities, what I'm really saying. Mm-hmm. And though it was enforced then, it's not enforced now. But if you go to the high schools here in San Diego, they are as segregated now as they were then. Some are more segregated by race, I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's all on a volunteer basis. We think it's awful regardless of what basis it is. To be able to sit with everybody ought to be enforced. To sit with people who don't look like us, who don't look like individuals. And we have this beautiful multi-city here, and it's not as integrated as it ought to be. When I say integrated, I mean open to everybody. Mm-hmm. The famous Lincoln High School was the high school we had to fight to get open and so forth. Now Lincoln High School is a big high school, big, as you probably know. Mm-hmm. And we produce many great football players and baseball players from Lincoln High School, which is great. We couldn't go to the schools where you attend, for example, all across the city. We go to them now. But the community is resegregated. We are a city of communities by color or by race. That's what we are now. Luckily, it is voluntarily done, but it's still bad.
Yeah. What are some of the things that we could do, or that I could do as a student growing up here to change that in the future?
I think the biggest thing would be to open up all the books, the movies, to dwell upon the multicultural aspect of San Diego as it is around across the country. I think then 50 years ago, since 1964, that's hard to believe. But all the movie stars now, got black directors and not just Jones alone, but you got all, or what's his name, but all the black actors and waitresses and actresses and actors, baseball players, football players. But it's just as bad in some cases, because if you look at the basketball, it's all black, practically all black. Mm-hmm. We say it's voluntarily. I don't care personally. Some of us don't care whether it's voluntary or not. It ought to reflect our society. It does not. Back then it was enforced. Now it's voluntary. If you look at all the great basketball players, and I said, look, we're discriminating against white players, and it shouldn't be. We should look out and see the baseball teams, the football teams, the basketball teams, the soccer teams, reflecting everybody. We don't have that. Mm-hmm. And I know that the excuse is, well, it's volunteer. It doesn't really matter. If my son or grandson or great-grandsons look out at the world through the television, that what they see is what we saw back then. We said it was enforced back then, and it's not forced now. To some of us, it doesn't matter. They ought to see all the peoples of this city reflected, all the peoples of the country reflected in all those sports, and we don't. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question, though? Yeah. So we can live anywhere we want to, and it's okay. If we want to live in segregated housing, that's okay. That's volunteer. But it's not volunteer. For example, I'm so happy that they're going to have maybe the black players, for example, can can unionize because it's being fought. Black players can unionize because we call it a slave plantation, a slave mentality, where the basketball, if you look out there, it's all black, mostly all black. Football, mostly all black, the great stars and all this. And we say this is a country where everybody ought to be reflected. So we had to fight back then to break down the barriers. That's great. But to voluntarily then resegregate it is still bad. And that's, I think that ought to change.
I agree.
And I think the players are absolutely great and right and unionizing, because we've called that slave plantation all the time. The other plantation to talk about San Diego is our prison system. I've called it the new plantation of prisons, or the new plantations for black and brown, from wall to wall almost. Well, you have a few whites, of course, but mostly are black, mostly are brown, black and brown, in the jails and in the prisons and so forth. Again, that's awful. That's ridiculous. I know what the excuses are. Everybody here with the Urban League, and everybody knows what the excuses are, but it's still bad. Going to the prison and 90 or 80, whatever, even 60% are black. That's wrong. They ought not be that way. But nobody talks about it but me and a few others. And I call that the new slave plantations. The prison system ought to change.
Yeah. How can African Americans and Latinos work together to release themselves from these kind of problems and stereotypes?
Good. I think we can continue to do what we're doing now. The barriers are broken. Voluntarily just join together. Sometimes we need to fight together. The fight for the African Americans is no different from the fight for the Hispanics, for example, citizenship and the whole bit. We've been that route. We should join with them in that. That fight is our fight, is what I'm really saying. And we should see it that way. It's good here that way right now. Blacks and browns, whether they are Hispanic or Asian, doesn't really matter. All groups work together pretty well here. To answer your question, I think we should do more of that. We should work together. Out there, even the school where you go, for example, is a good alternative school. We should work together to change all the conditions. For their fight, meaning any other person's fight, is our fight too.
Yeah.
We've been there and done that. And color of skin should be no badge for anything. Whether it's black, brown, yellow, or beige skin should not be a measure of anything. It measures nothing.
Thank you. What is your earliest experience with the Urban League?
Oh, with the Urban League. Let's see. The early experience was when I came to San Diego in 1964. We occupied what's called the Robinson Building at 5th and Broadway downtown. 5th and East Street. Yeah, oh my goodness. 5th and East Street downtown. We were on the 5th floor, and the Urban League was on the floor below us. And I got to know John Johnson, who was the director of the Urban League then, and Howard Carey, who died a few years ago, as the director of the Urban League. And so we were on the 5th floor, they were on the 4th floor, so I got introduced to them right away as soon as I got in town, and the reception for me was held with all kinds of people joining in, and I got to know them.
Yeah.
And I've been working with the Urban League ever since. That's how I got to know the Urban League, and we've joined together in so many different programs. We had joint programs for mentoring, for housing. We had a joint housing committee. All the committees, we have all the history and all the papers you'll hear about later. My library collection is the largest ever contributed individually to the San Diego State Library, San Diego State system. I have more stuff contributed there. But the Urban League was the cornerstone of much of what we joined to come to, what we came to San Diego to do. They were fighting racism and all this. That's how I got to know the Urban League, through John Johnson and Howard Carey. We were on the 5th floor, they were on the 4th floor. We worked together ever since. When they moved, we were right with them. And Howard Carey died about, 10 years ago, I imagine. It's 8 or 9 years ago, and John Johnson is still here. They were great. So that's how I got to know the Urban League. And I've worked with the National Urban League. I went to several of their conferences. I was a speaker at one of the workshops there. So I've been working with them hand in hand. Great group.
So I know that you've dedicated a lot of your time here to making San Diego a better place. What would you like for your legacy to be here?
My legacy, I think, would be that I contributed more to the library, the Senegal State Library. My contribution is allegedly the most, let's see, the widest, I guess, more contributions that I contributed in terms of the library there. It's not all there now. Much of it is in my house, in my home, but we have a group that's working to save all my stuff, because I save every paper, I save every little thing, and I worry every night that it doesn't burn down before we can get it all done. But I have tapes of everything we've ever done, and my legacy, I hope, would be to contribute that to libraries and other places in San Diego, where we have the photos, the original tapes. I have some of the rare tapes. I have some copies of the only tapes made of some of that stuff, and I'd like to contribute it to some agency, including the Urban League, before I die.
Well, that's it for me. Is there
Perfect.
anything else?
Perfect, excellent. I gotta tell you guys something. Out of
Things I didn't know. I didn't know personally how terribly segregated San Diego was.
Right, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, and see what this is gonna help too, this is gonna go around to, I think what National wants to do with this, they wanna present it to all of the other affiliates.
That would be good.
Because everybody, every city deals with their issues
Yeah,
differently
yeah,
because of the location. So hopefully, out of all of the information they gather, that we could come up with good practices that'll work in each city. You know, that's what I see that they're trying to do with this. And information that you provided here, man, is priceless. So thank you. Because this
Thank
is
you.
priceless.
Well, you can give me a copy of it, and I'm going to pick up some other copy of
Yeah.
a month ago, whatever it
What
was.
else I owe you, man? So, I think, what's her name has a copy of the last interview we did. I think Crystal has that.
Oh, I think so.
Crystal may have it, because I don't have any of the stuff that she has already.
Yeah, call her and see if she got some of that stuff, because
The last interview we did with you?
yeah, there was the last. That's not too long ago, and I was going to come by. What did we do with you the last month, the last 2 months?
That was the one with Crystal. The last interview we did it right down in that hallway down there. And it was
Yeah.
the interview we did with you and somebody else, I think.
Yeah, it was. Ask her anyway. Get copies of that. I need that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, this was great. This that's great. Really good.
She did an excellent job. She's doing.
look, some of these questions,
See, and I was worried about, man, I'm always on the technical side, how it looks. Man, it looks great.
And it's taking a different frame, not a criminal, but more thing.
Joey Estrada with Rise Up Industries, which is modeled after the home model part of the National Home Day Network. Also at San Diego State University in the Department of Counseling and School Psychology, training youth that are trying to be school counselors and school psychologists. Come from a neighborhood that was impacted by gangs and drugs and violence, and as an academic, trying to take a lens of research that's telling the truth. And my research is primarily looking at street culture and how we can stop demonizing young men and women, and making this mutuality of kinship between each other, that there's no us versus them. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and have people like this to be able to try to evaluate some of the programs that are going out to tell the truth, what's going on. A lot of times we hear these popular words like evidence-based practice, and that's what all the funders and grant writers want to hear. But I believe in practice-based evidence, and so what really works out there, and how we can show that that evidence that what the practitioners are facing on a day-to-day basis, and how real that is.
Good morning, how are you?
Good morning.
My name is Mike Delarocha. I wear two hats. One, I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Californians for Safety and Justice. Robert Rose, who spoke this morning, is our organizing director. I'm also an artist that believes strongly in the power of stories to affect social change. And I'll just give a quick example to kind of set the context. Policy change always lags behind a cultural change. 2 weeks ago, honored to help put together and perform at the first ever TED event in a California state prison. It's at Ironwood State Prison, only the third time TED's ever done anything in a prison in the entire United States. And what was important was a couple things. One is half the speakers were inmates themselves. Two, the audience was made up of business leaders, cultural leaders, politicians, so they got to see a different view of our family members that were impacted by the system. And what ended up happening was the opening speaker was Richard Branson, the CEO of Virgin, one of the largest corporations in the world. And in that moment, he was able to articulate and say, I myself served jail time. No one would know this. The guy that's going to take us to the moon and into space is basically formerly incarcerated individual that is seeing himself as a mirror with those inside. And so the purpose of that whole thing was we're editing the videos to help them go out so that people could see the stories of those affected. And it's not just 2.2 million people behind bars, it's 2.2 million families suffering, as well as the others that were on the other side. Something I spoke about yesterday is as a believer of restorative justice, and language in particular is very important to me. I have issues with victim offender because every family member of mine inside and every person I've met inside is also a victim. And so at the end of the day, how do we bring all survivors together in a cultural narrative that's different than what we have today? So I'm very excited to learn from you and share as well.
Thank you. Well, we're going to get started. So you hear cultural awareness and sensitivity, and it says in the book, History of Culture and Incarceration and Dealing with the Incarcerated Segregation. So we're going to get into this issue, but then I just want to bring to the table as we start out that there's a guy by the name of Reverend James Lawson. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but one of the ones surviving leaders from the civil rights movement. And he did some study. He went back to India and did some studying with Gandhi on the nonviolent principles. And when he returned, he hooked up with Dr. Martin Luther King in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he was one of the key leaders in that. But what he found out is that there's always an underpinning dominant lie that's underneath the system of what we're talking about. Like this isn't just happening, and it just isn't that lie. Some of those lies are that we're just dangerous by nature, and certain things are inevitable to happen because we're black and brown, and you should expect this type of behavior. And also one of the dominant lies is that we are the enemies. We are each other's enemy. There is a us and them, as he was mentioning. It's not a we culture. And so when he found out that the dominant lie that was being perpetuated, I should say, for us to believe and has become a belief in society is that some people are more valuable than others. Some people are more valuable than I'm thinking about just recently, they built a huge facility in Stockton, California for medical facility for the incarcerated there. It's supposed to be the place where they send all of the medical cases, so it's a hospital, basically incarcerated situation for a hospital. But a report just came out just yesterday that they had to stop admissions. Why did they have to stop admissions? Because there were people that had died already in there because the conditions, this is a new facility, but the conditions are substandard. That there was somebody bleeding to death and called on help and nobody came. And that there were not enough towels, that they were using socks, in order to bathe and everything, which to me is still giving a...
How we do it.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Started?
Go.
Can you start by giving me your name?
J.J. Anderson.
And can you give us a quick overview of the program?
Well, it's an AB 109. AB 109 is prison realignment. So the state passed legislation on a change in how we imprison inmates. And all nonviolent offenders who used to go to state prison now come to the county. And they're the responsibility of the county now. So there's no way that we have enough jail space to house all these people. So now the community is going to be responsible for a lot more inmates than they used to be because they're getting out of jail faster. So that's what it's called prison realignment. And that's what this is about. It's about bringing people of color and women together to talk about this new AB 109 legislation and how we're going to handle it as a community, as a local community and statewide in California.
Okay. What are some solutions that you guys are coming to?
Well, one of the law enforcement solutions is called the Community Transition Center. And the Community Transition Center, instead of, it used to be when people got out of prison, what they would do is give you $200 and they'd say, go to parole, meet it in by 3 days, and then talk to your parole agent. Well, a lot of people, if you have addiction or you're homeless and you don't know where you're going, that 3 days is going to get you caught out there. It's going to get you in trouble. So what we've done as a law enforcement as law enforcement is we pick everyone up from prison and we bring them down to an assessment center where they can stay until we assess them and find a new place for them to be. It may be, depending on their assessment, they may be in a drug rehabilitation program, they may go home, they may go to employment education program. So we're looking at ways to make sure that we give the inmates and the people who are coming out a chance to survive and be successful.
And why is this such a big problem for the Black and brown community?
Because of the number and the percentage of Black and brown people who are in prison. San Diego is 4% African American, just to give you an example. And the prison system here, 30% of the people in prison are African American. So there's a disparity there, this disparity. And then the 30% are Latino. So that's huge. Those numbers are huge, and so it's an issue in our community. People of color in prison, and they come back to us. They're still our family, whether they go to prison or not. They're still our kids. We have to take care of them. They're our brothers, our sisters. So, I work for the district attorney's office, and it's really important that we, people of color, take care of people in both ways.
Thank you.
Excellent, yeah.
Okay.
We
kind of give you an idea of some of the things that we've worked on and what we're currently working on today.
Great, thank you, Charlene. And just a couple things that I noted, and again, we'll kind of go through the panel and then have a chance for questions, but one of the things right away, if folks aren't, or haven't thought about it, if you're in the San Diego area and have not been a part of the San Diego Reentry Roundtable, I really encourage you to connect with Charlene after to make sure she's aware and they can send you an invitation. And two, as we move forward, just, we're talking more about, we'll talk more about it, the 211 resource, if folks aren't aware about it, the toolkit, and, just really start thinking about some of these really concrete resources that folks have out there available. And a lot of that is on the Cal Reentry website, calreentry.com, understanding.
So, and I'm sorry, one of the other ones that was implemented with the chair of the employment committee was the Clean Slate Clinic. That's been going on for almost 2 years now. We've had volunteers from the local law schools and those who have been previously incarcerated themselves as volunteers. This clinic is once a month, every Saturday, and it's to assist those with expungement. So I can get in, but that's another area that the Reentry Roundtable has worked on, and this clinic's been going on for almost 2 years.
Great. So another great resource, Clean Slate Clinics. So clearly, if you want to hear more about that, we can certainly talk about that in Q&A. I'm going to move on down the road and introduce Rebecca Brown. Rebecca, yes, has a long and amazing history. So I'll keep it short because Rebecca's asked for that. But just to give you a brief sense, Rebecca is the founder and president of Further the Work, and has spent more than a decade helping nonprofit organizations, public agencies, community groups do their work and do it better. She's a facilitator, trainer, community organizer, organization development, strategic planning consultant, highly experienced social service program designer and grant writer, having served as the sole or lead author of numerous innovative programs that have become recognized as exemplary in their fields. And in particular, Rebecca's played a key role in helping Contra Costa County organize efforts around AB 109 and AB 109 funds and what those funds can be used for and should be used for, and really about how to bring the community into that process. So with that, I'll turn that over to Rebecca to tell us more.
Hi everyone, let me hear you say hi.
Hi.
Okay, you're gonna watch me touch my phone. It is not because I'm multitasking, it's because I've got a stopwatch. So this is part of, I run meetings very tightly, and that means I have to manage my own time as well. So as Katie said, I'm founder and president of an organization called Further the Work, which is a place-based small consulting firm working to advance social justice in Contra Costa County. I also am founder with Susan Kim of Bay Area Legal Aid of a community initiative called the Reentry Solutions Group that started in July 2011. And the Reentry Solutions Group is based in Richmond, California and Contra Costa, which is just outside of Oakland and San Francisco in Northern California. Richmond is a town of about 100,000 people. It's very racially diverse, and the racial mix has changed over the last several decades. It's also a community that had been very empowered and profitable, has strong economic background all through the Second World War, but then has suffered through 60 years of post-industrial economic decline with all of the consequences, and I'll come back to that in a second. Susan and I founded Reentry Solutions Group because I realized that there was this common denominator affecting everybody in our community, and we were seeing social service providers talking about mental health needs or substance abuse needs or housing needs or employment needs, and I thought the thing that all of these things have in common is that there's this cycle of trauma, poverty, trauma, crime, incarceration, unsupported reentry. That's what's pulling all of these things together, the underpinning of all of this. So that was the theme, was we've got reentry in common, and I don't care where you stand on the political spectrum, and our community is affecting your life. And I realized at the same time that though there were a lot of initiatives that were working around reentry, there wasn't any way for them to come together. And so I thought, okay, we have a functional gap. We need a table that everybody can come to. So Susan and I started RSG as a monthly to reentry. So we bring in all kinds of presenters to teach us about issues related to reentry. And then the third is gradual movement towards action, either individual or collective. Plus we give you lunch. And we get 80 to 100 people every month, and it's intentionally extremely inclusive. So we have everything from CDCR to the guy who just came in off the corner, and every single voice in that room matters. You used the phrase community voice, and this is something, we all use this phrase. We want community voice to be heard. I have a question for you. When was the last time we said we want to make sure the county voice gets heard? Why is it that the community voice is always the afterthought? Why is it the community dollars are always the afterthought? Why is it the community expertise is always the afterthought? So with the three parts of relationship building, public education, and action, we're really doing three things these days. We're doing civic
Because again, the CTC is that initial assessment center. We don't track compliance to that initial appointment. We have other avenues for that, but that's outside of my little world. So the expectation is that the case managing probation officer, the assigned PO, takes that torch and runs with it and makes sure that the person is going to the service that they've been referred. So to answer your question in a long way, yes, we do refer to CPOs.
Yeah, I heard the percentage of people leaving within the first 7 days. What's the average of the individual staying after the 7 days? Is it a month, 2 months, 3 months? And during that stay, are they receiving counseling through the lighthouse, or are they just staying?
Nobody has to stay a specific amount of time. So the vast majority, 40% of the people are gone within 7 days. So the other people stay longer. I don't like averages because a lot of people come one day and leave. So an average isn't going to give you a full picture. So I actually have, if you're particularly interested, I have on our stats that, like I said, 41% stay the 1 to 7, but then 12% are staying more than 22 days. So it really just depends on what their plan is. There's some programs, frankly, that takes a while to get into, so they stay at the CTC waiting for that bed. To answer your question, we have on site pretty much every day. We're going to have 2 mental health clinicians, licensed clinicians, 4 probation officers, and we also have the Lighthouse counseling staff. So as our staff, and Michelle, I have to give a shout out to Michelle Romero. She's the manager of the clinicians, so she's my partner in crime in everything that we do. But so what we have, the clinicians meet with everybody, and the probation officers meet with everybody. But the way it kind of works is we designate who's got high mental health needs. They meet with the clinician every day. Everybody else meets with the probation officer. So that's a continual, a daily check-in. We call it a daily check-in. On top of that, we have the counseling staff of the CTC and the Lighthouse. And again, there's a difference between CTC and Lighthouse, who, maintain the structure of the program and obviously talk to and keep people involved in the process, but they're going to groups 6 hours a day. So while they're at the CTC, they're in groups for 6 hours a day. They meet with the probation officer and or a clinician. So we stay on top of emergent issues. And as far as walkaways or responders, people do walk away. People do a lot of people aren't ready. So actually, from January to March, in the last quarter, we had 56 people.
Oh, that's too close. Okay, right. Okay, well, we just,
they're from the urban league.
actually, this is gonna be easy for you. Just let him talk.
Can I get your name first?
My name is Richard Hawkes.
Okay.
I'm the founder and executive director or CEO of the Black Brown Summit.
Okay.
This is the fourth one we've done in a series. We did the first one in Dallas, Texas
Sure.
in 2007. We also did one in Stockton and Modesto in 2008, 2009. We got involved again because of this AB 109 realignment issues that are impacting California.
Mhm.
So we thought it was a good time to bring these back and start, trying to work with the Black and Latino populations to address this, understanding that there are issues within the prison system, between the blacks and the browns and the gangs and all that. What we want to bring to light is historically, blacks and Latinos were united, and I'm referring back to my experience and my parents' experience back in the 1940s when they had what they called the Zoot Suit riots. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was when the sailors were coming in and they were attacking, the Zoot Suit Latino community down in LA. Well, down in central LA, the Latinos and the blacks were united. In fact, the black population were joining with the Latinos to combat the sailors that were attacking the Latinos. And historically, there was a relationship there. What happened after the 1940s and started getting to the 1960s, the blacks started congregating them in South LA. The Latinos went into East LA, and then they started with the freeway systems, and that kind of broke up the communication barrier, or the communication that we had among the races. So we kind of grew up in two different areas of the city, and that has and we stopped the communication. Myself, I go back to our heroes when we were growing up, were James Brown, Willie Mays. So back when we were growing up as Mexican Americans, Chicanos, we didn't really have heroes. So we looked to, in our music, a lot of the music in East LA, some of the groups, it's all founded on Motown and the Black African American experience. So what we're trying to do is overcome, some of the artificial barriers that society has put on us, and try to reestablish, communication. Because as two major minority groups in the U.S., it's obvious that if we can gel and come together, that we would have more impact on issues like recidivism, housing, discrimination, and those types of things. So that's my personal perspective on why we'd like to see this thing success. There's always going to be issues. Cultural issues, things like that, but I think we have more in common as minority people than not. And that's pretty much where we're coming from. I don't know if you have any questions, or you'd like me to.
Nail on the head with everything.
We wanted to get. What I'm listening at? I'm listening at dates because I'm doing a timeline. I'm looking at the timeline
of what happened. 1940, 45, just before the war ended.
And that was just before the second Great Migration, because they had two migrations.
Right.
And so the second was between 1940 and 1970. So I'm making reference, in my head, I'm making reference to, wow, okay, so this happened during that time where you had more came out.
Right, and then what happened in the 60s, I'm happen to be, I've been around a while, brother, is when they had the civil unrest down in the 1965, there were a lot of Latinos that went down to South LA and joined in those riots. People don't know that. We don't know about that. People don't know that. But because we were still communicating, because we still had the heroes like, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, we didn't have any. The first leader that came up was Cesar Chavez, and he came up, in the 60s and 70s.
Sure.
But in terms of black leadership, we've have looked to the black community. At least I have, because I'm a realist, and the blacks started the civil rights, of course with some of the the Jewish well, we all know that, but I mean in terms of being on the forefront of civil rights, the black community has been very active in that. Our experiences are a little different now, because we didn't go through the slavery issues and all that, but we've experienced discrimination. And my opinion is, if you don't like black people, you don't like Latino people. I mean, you know what I mean. And the racism is.
Now you know what you just did. You just explained, because what we want to do between the Chavez civil rights movement for the agricultural workers,
right,
and the Great Migration, because between the African Americans and everything. You just explained one of the similarities,
right?
The similarity, and you also explained one of the differences, and so that's key information,
Right.
very good information.
And the other key thing is that where I've seen anyway is that over the centuries, as the blacks became more integrated, but when they were first here, they got separated from their language or culture. Another continent, a little different for Latinos and Mexicans. They're coming over, but we're from the the same continent. So we always had our culture, our language wasn't ripped apart from us.
That's
another distinction.
That's something that's good. That's good. We got that here too. Yes.
So
the language, the language.
These people, the undocumented, they come over, and they still carry the language and the customs. And Mexican Americans, Chicanos like me, that are basically English is my first language. And I speak Spanish very well, but still we get the the cultural stuff. Where the African American population, it's not maybe within the last 50 years that you've been hooking up with people in.
We're still trying to figure it out, brother. Trust me. As a people, we're still trying to figure it all out.
And
we had to create our own culture, kind of.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it out.
So hopefully that can.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra Thomas, Dr. Sandra Thomas.
Dr. Sandra Thomas, okay, and you are?
Reverend Dr. Willie Douglas.
Reverend Dr. I love that, his name. Okay, go folks, go for it.
Well, when it comes to talking about the civil rights movement in any aspect, I've been involved in civil rights for 62 years now. Started very young. I became a member of the NAACP at a time when we had family membership, so everyone in the family was a member. Well, that was back a long time ago. I come from a family that migrated from the South into the Midwest, trying to make things better for themselves. Many of our family were people that had worked on plantations. Many of us are of mixed ethnicities, simply because of plantation life, not by choice, but by life. And so we learned to come into a new area and improve things for ourselves. Life was not easy, but it did improve over time.
Well, basically, when you talk about the civil rights movement, you're talking about an era, a time that seems to be fading as a result of some of the sophisticated things that have dwelled into the mindset of our people, as far as the direction that where we once came from, as far as dealing with the struggles of life, of trying to make things better. It seems like things have reverted, like we lost affirmative action. Affirmative action is not the same. We're talking about, the mindset of our younger generation of kids, as far as not having a full concept or understanding of where the struggles of our ancestors, our people been through to make things even a little better, although things have never been better. It's just a little bit more sophisticated, where there's the appearance of it is as it is. But the thing about it is we're still in a system of slavery, but that sophisticated slavery that we've been caught up in has poisoned or tainted the mind of our young people to the point that they don't have the leadership or the upbringing from those that really brought the significance of meaning of what it was to fight for the justice and right to make things a little better. We now have our people, as far as, and speaking on the black perspective, of those that it's like we don't have a sense of identity. We lost our sense of identity of who we are, as far as understanding that, hey, wait a minute, man, we've been through all these hardships, our ancestors. Why are we taking ourselves through this? Why am I having this lack of understanding, and why am I calling you these words, the N word or whatnot? And now people got comfortable at any race and people could call each other that, and now we're in that kind of mindset where we don't know who we are, and we done lost track. When you talk about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and some of those others that have fought, and then you to tell us to these kids, well, who is that, you know? So the bottom line is we have lost our sense of struggle, our identity, and the main thing, we have lost our connection with the higher authority, God, as far as fulfilling and knowing what our purpose is to get us over into the next level, into the promised land. God bless you.
Excellent. Now, we need to do one thing. We didn't bring any there, before we release this, normally what we do, we have people sign the thing.
The waiver.
The waiver. Now, what I'm going to do, which is still good, just so we can have it on record, I can do this. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you give us the permission to use this for what we're telling you is being used for only? And that's going to be with the National Urban League. And it's the historical and cultural legacy video. That's what this is going to be used for. This information will be stored in an archive for review later for our, you know, in other words, Lena is a historian, okay? So you guys
we
do.
We do this. So.
You give us that permission.
Yes.
I'll give you the permission.
Answer by saying yes.
Yes.
You can show it to the world because they need to hear the truth.
They
All
need to
right,
hear the truth
great.
when it comes to civil rights.
All right, thank you so much.